So the name is a very big part of the practice, you know. And in their case, Ram was that was the sound. You know, Ma would say that, Maharaji would say, I don't know anything except for Ra and Ma. That's it. And in that is everything. Maharaji said, Ram naam karne se sab pura ho jata hai, which means by repeating the name of Ram, everything comes to fruition or completion.
I'm Olivia Clementine, and this is Love and Liberation. Today our guest is Nina Rao. Nina learned traditional chants from her grandfather in a village in South India when she was 9 years old. The chants quietly stayed with her until she rediscovered chanting with Krishna Das in New York in 1996. For many years, Nina has been Krishna Das's business manager and accompanies him on stage. She has since recorded the albums Anatarayami, Knower of All Hearts, and Anubhav. Nina regularly leads kirtan, workshops, and retreats in her hometown of Brooklyn, New York, and beyond. I would love to start with your roots and hearing about more of the visceral experience of tapping into your roots through your grandfather and your time in Southern India. I know you kind of revisited again kirtan and chanting later on in life again, but what was that like growing up? Also, the pujas that you would perform, more of the tangible experience of that. Like, what did that imbue in you?
Well, let me start by saying that I actually didn't spend all of my youth in India. I was actually born in Queens, in New York. My father worked with an airline, and so he was transferred every 3 years to a different place. So as a result, my sisters and I grew up in many different countries around the world. But what did happen is we would spend 6 years abroad and then we would go back to India. So as it happens, in the first 20 years of my life, I spent 10 of them in India, scattered, but 10 of them were in India. And my grandfather, we lived in the big cities in Delhi and Mumbai, but my grandfather lived in a small village. It's on the west coast of India in a state called Karnataka. And the village was actually on the border of Kerala and Karnataka. So that's southern India on the west coast. And at the time, it was a very tiny, old fishing village. And the biggest building, I think, was the ruins of an ancient fort called the Bekal Fort, which has now become a tourist destination for cruise ships. It wasn't back then. Back then were a few fishing boats, and my grandfather had the only car in the village. So he was an engineer for the British government, and by the time I met him as a child, he had already retired. And he had this beautiful South Indian home that was surrounded by orchards, and there were a couple of cows, cashew trees, coconut trees, mango trees, and some rice fields that other farmers were farming in the distance. So it was sort of an idyllic place for us to visit during our summer vacation, which is when we went there. And it used to be in monsoon season, sort of hot and humid and then rainy, full of bugs, snakes, you know. But the house was, my grandfather, I didn't realize, you know, as I think back now, I realize the depth of his devotion. I didn't really understand what it was back then. My parents kept a very simple home. We lived abroad so much, so we had a little altar in the house. with a couple of deities, and my mother would light an incense before dinner. And that was basically the extent of the puja that we did. But when we went back there was a separate room for the altar. And in it, the largest image was that of our family deity, which is Sringeri Sharada Devi, which is a form of Saraswati. And it's an old temple that was built many hundreds of years ago, but made particularly well known by Adi Shankaracharya in the later years of Indian Hindu dharmic practices. So I never went to that temple, but this image of Sharada Devi was installed in that temple. My grandfather's name was Gopala Krishnaya, and my grandmother's name was Yashoda. So my whole family, my mother's name is Anasuya. So we have all these names that come from the sacred texts, And my father decided to give us more Western names because he wanted us to grow up in the West, and he thought it would be easier, which is so ironic now because all my friends have Indian names, You know what I mean. So, but the thing that would happen every day, especially in the evenings after sundown, was puja would be done in my grandfather's altar room, which was very simply just blowing the conch, chanting a few mantras, which I didn't know at the time. I don't even know what they were, actually. And then we would go around the house and light the oil lamps, including the tulsi plant in the front compound of the house, because tulsi is considered goddess. So that was a daily practice, and we loved it as kids. We waited for that time of day. My aunts would do it, and we'd go running behind her, and can we light it? Can we blow the conch? Can we, And but the thing that happened for me there specifically was that it was the first time I really heard spiritual chanting. Because my grandfather, though he was an engineer, he owned a harmonium and a lot of bamboo flutes. And they used to sit in one corner of the big living room that we spent a lot of time in. And also on the shelves were books written in English of the Krishna Leelas, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata. And I picked them up because in those days in the summer we read. That's what we did. And I gobbled them up. I loved them. And I would wait to go back. It's, the things you cherish when you're young. There wasn't a thought in my mind that, maybe I should buy those books for myself. No, they remained there in my grandfather's house. And then next summer I would go back and read them again. Now they're here with me, but that's where they were. And one day I asked my grandfather to play the harmonium because he allowed us to kind of play around on it, and just play songs. I didn't play any instruments or had any musical training. And he said, I'll play, but you have to sing. And he started singing this prayer to Ganesha. And my aunts and my mother and my cousins who lived in India, they all were able to follow along. And my sisters and I just kind of jumped in. And then on that same visit, he had satsang at his house. So satsang was something, again, new for me. I didn't know what that was. And so they made a bigger altar in the center of the living room. And beautiful flower garlands and oil lamps were polished up, and the wicks were made. And then everybody sat on these simple, straw mats in the living room on the terracotta floor. And the women sat on one side and the men sat on one side, as they do in India. And everybody led a bhajan. Young girls too, who were like my age. And I remember kind of sitting on the side with my aunt, and I was so pulled in by the beauty and the depth of that communal sharing without even fully understanding the sacred quality of what was being sung. I didn't understand that it was the chanting that was working on us, that was helping us break down the barriers between each of us, helping us understand our interconnectedness. Like all this I see now as an older woman. But I do remember cherishing that feeling. And like you and anybody else, we've had those moments in our lives, in whatever way. It could have been looking at your cat. It could be looking at a tree. It could be, a random act of kindness. Somebody did something for you that you just out of the blue for no particular reason. Or you did something, that you were called to do, just like that. So this, I'm beginning to understand more and more, is that feeling of presence. And the next, over time, I've, obviously we've had these kind of feelings, but the next time that I really kind of felt the full force of it was much later in my life, in my early 30s, when I first heard Krishnadas chant. So that's pretty much, as a kid, we traveled to lots of places and we always visited temples, and I loved to go into churches. I went to Catholic schools, when we lived abroad, because they were the only English-speaking ones some of the time. And when the Catholic kids went to Mass, I wanted to go. And they said, well, you have to go to moral science because you can't take communion. So I said, moral science? That sounds really boring. I'd rather go and sing, hymns to Jesus. So they said, okay, if you don't take communion, no problem, you can go. And so I was, I like to read stories about Jesus, and I know when I look back, I realize, the seeds were sown, not in this lifetime, maybe another.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And would you tell us too about the roots of Indian chants and mantra?
Well, the truth of the matter is there isn't much history that's written down about it. There are people who are studying now who help us understand. And, it's said that the original mantras that were chanted, many hundreds of years ago, come from the Rig Veda and the other Vedas that were associated with it from that time. And if you look at the prayers that are in the Rig Veda, for example, there are, I don't know all the divisions off the top of my head. There are a few different ones. My Sanskrit teacher would tell you, but I don't know them. I just like to chant. And they say that the kirtan and the kind of prayers that we chant now, which is Nam Kirtan, which is the chanting of the divine names, have descended from those original Vedic mantras. A lot of the Vedic mantras had to do with the elements, a lot of the devatas like Indra and Ganesha and all, but they were all not in the forms that we see them in now. They're more energies, And it's said that the rishis who were doing incredible intense tapasya or spiritual practice to purify themselves were able to receive these mantras as a transmission. And they received them. Why? So that they could share them with the rest of us to help us. So that, this is from the early Vedic tradition. And over the years since then, a lot of the practice of the chants that we hear now, for example, the things that I chant and maybe Krishnadas you've heard and other people, they're all names of the divine in all the manifold aspects. And many of them have stories associated with them. So, for example, if you are singing Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram, Ram is a character in the Ramayana, but he's also bigger than that. Then he's not even he anymore. It is just presence, but in the form of Ram. There's also, from the Puranas that came after the Vedas and the Upanishads, are the stories that we hear about, the Devi Bhagavatam and Srimad Bhagavatam and so on. So some of the mantras and the prayers will be derived from some of those scriptural texts as well. But there are also some long form prayers that people can chant. For example, we sing the Hanuman Chalisa, which is 40 verses in praise of Hanuman. In the same way, there are the same for different forms of the goddess. There are long form prayers for Shiva. So many, it's so much. So it's hard, I don't think I can give you a real history, but except to know that the repetition of the name in whatever form, whether it's simply repetition, where you're just uttering the names, or you're doing it mentally in your mind as a meditation practice, or you're singing alone, or you're singing in a group, it is considered the most, they say it's actually the only practice we can do these days because our mind is so cluttered with thoughts, and we have so many challenges, mental and emotional obstacles that we have to overcome in order to actually focus on what is divine. But by the use of the mantra, we're able to let those thoughts come and go and slowly start to fall away, so we can actually enter into meditation.
I also would love to hear about your teacher, Sri Siddhi Ma, and who was she, and how did you know she was your teacher? What was the moment you knew she was your teacher?
Well, this is her. She, they say that the guru finds you, and but I do think some people get kind of hit on the head with it. But for me, at the time that I was able to meet her, I really was searching for something. And I didn't really know it up until I found myself asking the question, how do I find a guru? And that happened when I first started chanting with Krishna Das. And the first time I ever heard him chant, I had gone to participate in a yoga retreat, and he was invited to lead the evening satsang, so he was chanting. And I noticed before he walked in the room, because I actually wasn't planning to stay. I was going to leave because I thought it was going to be boring. So, but I thought I would just be there and be polite and stay for the early part. And before he walked in, I noticed on the side table was a photograph of Neem Karoli Baba, and he's a saint from India. And then next to it was an image of Hanuman with a candle. So right away, there's an altar. So that kind of brought something back to me. And his chanting really hit me. It went straight through the center of my heart the moment I heard him sing the first Sri Ram, I think. And through the weekend, he talked about his guru. And I felt so much heart opening, which I didn't understand. I'd never had an experience of this. I'd never read about saints, even though we're an Indian family. And my parents and my grandfather did go to see Satya Sai Baba. I didn't really have much of an interest in that, just it didn't really occur to me that it should be anything I would be interested in. But when KD talked about it, it felt like he had come home, when he met his guru. So I wanted so much to have that feeling, I realized. And I realized we all do. We just have to find our own path, right? So I became friendly with him that weekend and talked to him a lot. And I was also very upset because I discovered that his guru had died. So how was I going to meet this being that had given him so much and was opening my heart? And And he said to me at the time, he said, you don't need a guru in the body, and when that's not what you want to hear, then you're not going to believe him, which I didn't. So I said, okay, fine. You had this experience, and good for you, but I really feel like I need to go to the roots where this happened. So tell me at least where the temple is, because I'm going to go to India and maybe something will happen. So he said, okay. So he told me where the temple was, and he said, since you've made up your mind to go. And it's not like he was trying to hold anything back, because like him, I also believe that you don't really have to go anywhere. If you're so called to go on pilgrimage, you can. But sacredness is all around us, We just have to keep exploring and see what really tugs at our heartstrings and resonates with us, so we can follow that path. And that path is the Guru. Practice is the Guru. Everything that happens to us is the Guru. But all that being said, I still had to go. So he said, all right, if you're going to go, then I'm going to write a letter for you, because you should meet Sri Siddhi Ma. Siddhi Ma, he told me, had been a long time disciple of Maharaji, had taken care of him for 40 years. And until he left the body in 1973. And after that, she had been entrusted with the care of the temples. So he said, I'm going to write a letter so you can meet her. And then I got hopeful. I thought, oh, she's going to be my guru. And meanwhile, I had gone to see some other saints who had come from India and come to New York. And I didn't feel a great attraction to them, and so I was disappointed. I thought maybe it's just not for me. Maybe a guru is not gonna, I don't deserve a guru. Who knows what the stories are that we tell ourselves. So I went to Kenchi, and I thought that as soon as I saw her, I would fall down prostrate on the floor, and she would just pick me up and everything would be done, and she would be my guru. It wasn't like that at all. What I remember is the sound of her voice. It was very specific kind of a tone that she had. And but what I felt as soon as I walked into the room, she was kind of silhouetted. It was dark and there was some light coming from behind. And I remember just being struck by the feeling, the same feeling of presence, that I felt when I heard Krishnadas chanting that first time, or when I heard chanting the first time with my grandfather, or, the first time that I just, I was swimming in the ocean as a kid and I saw fish. There's all kinds of moments that we have like that, and that was the feeling that I had. And I remember feeling that in the same way that I felt when I heard Krishnadasa's chanting, that this was familiar to me. I felt even before I saw her, as I rounded the bend and we were looking at the temple from the road, I said, oh my God, we're coming home. I just knew it. I was with my friend Ambika. And so she didn't say very much to us, and she just said, oh, you've come a long way. Why don't you go and take rest? There's food in the, they're preparing dinner and so on. And we had checked in at the office. There's an office in the temple, and then the manager there said, okay, you can stay for 3 days, but that's our policy. You stay for 3 days, and then after that, you should get a hotel room, and then you can come back and visit the temple as much as you want to. So, that was fine. We were just so happy that we could even stay there for 3 days. So we didn't say anything. We just went about our days, and we talked to Ma, and we said, can we do some seva? And she said, best seva you can do is chant, because she knew that we liked it. We told her Krishnadas had sent us, and she knew that he was chanting. She had known him all these years. So we would sit with the kirtanwalas in the room, and then at tea time, she said, sing Hanuman Chalisas in front of Maharaji's temple. So we said, okay, we'll do that. And then it was Durga Puja going on. So there were a lot of people. And there was times when they were doing arti, and then they would call us, and it was just temple activity. So on the after 3 nights, I had gotten up in the morning and I said, Ambika, pack up your things. Let's go to the town, get a hotel room, and come back so that we can spend the whole day here. I don't want to go in the evening with our stuff and look for a hotel room and all that. And we had to clear out of the room anyway. So she was packing, doing her last minute packing, and there was a knock on the door. And now it's like 5:30 in the morning or something, because we woke up very early to do practice. So I was wondering who this is. And it was Siddhi Ma's attendant, or the woman who took care of him. Her name is Jaya. Took care of her. Her name is Jaya. And I said, Jaya, what's up? And she said, and she looked all disheveled, which she never looked. And I said, what's happening? And she said, I don't know. Ma said, hurry up, quickly. Go to their room. Go fast. They're going to leave otherwise. And tell them they can stay. So at that moment, so many things happened. But I think the thing that I understood, and though it seems like a really small event, I understood that she knew exactly what we were feeling, what our wishes were, and she wanted to give it to us. So, and that never stopped in all the years that I continued to see her after that. And I really felt that she knows the hearts of the people who come to her, and needless to say, we stayed. And over the years, I developed a strong sort of personal bond with her, because we were able to relate with her in such a way that she knew all the little personal things in our lives, getting married, getting divorced, having a baby, which school, what college, my mother, my father, she knew everything because we talked about it. So it's hard to talk about her as a teacher in that way, because there were no formal teachings. She didn't, she would give us certain practices because she believed that practice was primary. Everybody needed to do practice, and it had to be some form of discipline, whatever that is for you. And she gave practices to different people. People would come say, Ma, what shall I do? And so she would say something for them. And it was different. It wasn't the same for everybody. But she believed that kirtan, repeating the name, whether it was japa practice, just repetition on a mala, doing prayers, and was very important. And she said, your meditation will arise if you do these practices. It's very hard to sit and meditate. You can't just meditate. You can't make yourself meditate. So you should use these practices to do that. And she said, be together. Be with your satsang. Like, she felt that was very important for us as a support. And it is, even in Buddhism, it's one of the 3 jewels. So this is how she taught us. And I can speak a little bit of Hindi. So what ended up happening was that I was translating for her, for the Westerners who were coming to see her. So many of the teachings, while she never explicitly related them to anything in my life, by hearing what she said to other people who came to her with problems or questions or wishes or desires, I learned so much about of her clarity of thought and how she understood people's situations, the amount of compassion she had, and the care that she took, to really listen and try to make you feel better, show love and be love, which is how she was. And when we were with her in the body, but so much of the time that in the years that ensued after that, I would go and see her, but I'd see her for 2 weeks, maybe a month at the most. And then I left. So that left me here for the rest of the time. So I learned early on how to be without her in the physical body and to feel close to her, which I must say has everything to do with practice, even when I wasn't with her. So how did I know she was my guru was kind of, I think at that moment when she said, you can stay, which was within the first few days that I met her. And it's never changed. It's only deepened since then. And it's even deeper, I think, after she's left the body. And it didn't change the closeness that I feel to her. It's a hard thing to talk about or explain. But I think people can understand that. Even if you think of even just a loved one you might have lost in your life, just because they're not here in the physical form doesn't mean that they're not inside of you.
And so in terms of the practices that you said that she would give, and were there any particular ones that she gave you that really stand out?
Yeah, mantra repetition is a big one. She really believed that repetition of the name was very important, and the name that she suggested for everybody was to just say Ram, because that's what Maharaji repeated, was always on his, when he was alive, people would say that he'd be sitting there and the whole time you could see that he was uttering Ram. You could hear it sometimes not, and when he was sleeping too. Yeah. And for her, so one of the things that Maharaji did when he was there, I don't know how many years he did it for, but certainly for a few years when he was in Kainchi, he would do a practice called Likhita Japa, which is the written form of writing the mantra as a practice. So he kept these notebooks, and they're still there in Kainchi, where he would write it a certain number of times. Maybe it was 108, I'm not really sure. And when he was going to take samādhi, the story is that he was in Kainchi, and Maharaji always was wrapped in a blanket a lot of the time. That was kind of a signature thing of his, because even no matter how hot it was, he still had that blanket. And Siddhi Ma, along with the other Ma's, the other women who were with him and took care of him and stayed in the back of the temple mostly, said that as he was leaving, he took out the notebook, he wrote September 9th, filled it in with all the Rams, which was the day that this happened. Then he wrote September 10th, and he filled it in, which was going to be the next day. And then he wrote September 11th, and he handed the notebook to Siddhi Ma, and he said, Ma, this is your work now. And he walked out of the temple and he dropped his blanket and he left. He ended up going to Vrindavan, and that's where his heart stopped beating, so to speak. So the name is a very big part of the practice, and in their case, Ram was that was the sound. Ma would say that, Maharaji would say, I don't know anything except for Ra and Ma. That's it. And in that is everything. Maharaji said, Ram naam karne se sab pura ho jata hai, which means by repeating the name of Ram, everything comes to fruition or completion. And for us, when we went to her, so there were people, of course, who said, what mantra should I repeat? And if we were in a group, she would say, do Ram Nam, like why do anything else? I don't know what other practices she might have given to other people. For me, my mantra practice is a mantra that I actually asked her whether I could do. And she agreed. She said that would be okay. And so since that is personal to the practitioner, it will remain so. So But she did say, for practice, the Hanuman Chalisa, she said, is just something we should do, because with that, and as we do our practice, she said, bring yourself to the feet of Maharaji, because she gave everything up to him. Mm-hmm. Or she said Hanuman, or, they were the same to her. And I'm going to say, remind me to tell you about the prayer that she would sing to Maharaji, which is something else. And so Hanuman Chalisa was very, very important for her. And that's the practice that she gave to all of us. And it's in the prayer books. Maharaji loved the Hanuman Chalisa too. Krishnadas says that when they were there in the 70s, these little booklets were handed out to all of them, and everybody did Hanuman Chalisa. So, we know that from the history of Maharaji that he was a Hanuman devotee from his old temples. He fashioned his own Hanuman out of clay, and and that was where he did all his spiritual practice, was with that Hanumanji. The temple itself where we were has many different deities. There's also Shiva, there's Lakshmi Narayan, there's Devi, the Vaishnavi Devi, from Durga, but from the Vaishnav tradition, where there's no sacrifices involved, because there are certain places in India where people do animal sacrifice, but that wasn't happening there. And so it's said that people worshipped Maharaji as Shiva, some people worshipped him as the goddess. I don't know. And Maharaji said once about Siddhi Ma, he was talking to somebody when Siddhi Ma was young and she wasn't living at the temple yet. She was married and living with her husband in town. And he told a devotee, he pointed to the place where she lived and he said, Katyayani lives there. Katyayani is another name for Durga. And he was referring to her. And he said, and it is for her that Hanuman had to come, which is him. And yet, if you look at Ma and the service that she did for Maharaji, you would say she's Hanuman. So the practices, there were specific practices in this way. There was, if times were particularly difficult, she would say, well, then do like Bajrang Ban is a certain different practice for Hanuman. She might tell people to do a more in-depth practice of singing multiple repetitions of Hanuman Chalisa, like, maybe 40, maybe 100. Lots of different ways, but Hanuman Chalisa was, she said that the Hanuman Chalisa, every syllable is Mahamantra, every sound. And the Hanuman Chalisa has the ability to change fate. I don't know what that means, but she said it, she believed it, so I will do it. And, if we were going through any difficult times, she would say, it's okay, we'll pray for you tonight. Now, if she can say that, then what's my problem? Yeah, that was a big thing. It was always like doing repetition of the name, chanting the Hanuman Chalisa, singing kirtan. She said it was very nice to do that. You taking the love and support of the group, everybody on the same path. And that was, that's a practice, being with your community and doing practice together.
And so what was the prayer that she would sing to Maharaji?
I wish I had been there when she sang. I never did hear her sing. But I found this, some devotees had written about her. And there was one woman who we knew, Shakuntala Ma, who said that in the early days, when they would sit with Maharaji, Maharaji said to Ma, so I'll just, the devotee Shakuntala, she was only 8 years old, but she remembers this, that Siddhi Ma had come to see Maharaji. And when the prasad was offered to Maharaji, he said to her, Ma, sing a bhajan, sing a devotional song. So the words, and the reason why I bring this up is because we talk about divine beings in a form, like Hanuman or Devi or Shiva and so on. But this is what she sang to him, and I'll just read the translation. You are without attributes. Even so, you are ever kind to devotees. You are desireless, yet you make this marvelous creation. You are formless, yet you are the eternal enlightened being. You are the Lord of all. You are helpless before love. Thinking of you all the time, sages and yogis are absorbed in your contemplation. Your spirit pervades the Vedas. You are the one adored. Nothing is greater than you. You are the strength of all. You are truth, consciousness, and bliss. Your power is eternal. And I won't read the whole thing, but it ends with, you have no beginning and no end. Glory to you, immortal one. The whole universe worships you. All praise to the controller of illusion. You are omnipresent. So, there are many more verses, but the thing that I love is, praiseworthy, you are the object of our devotion, unconquerable, yet love attaches you to your devotee. Singing about love in this way, as formless. It's just interesting when I saw that.
It's so powerful. There's so many little phrases that you share that we could just dwell on.
Exactly.
Thank you for reading it. In terms of Ma, because we talk about the Great Mother, and what is your experience of this force that that we open to when we chant, we come to that unified space?
It's interesting, you can debate this with people, because some people will say, well, like in this bhajan, that the ultimate divinity is without form. So there is no mother, there is no father. And yet in our prayers, we also say, Tvameva mata chapita tvameva tameva bandhus. And you're also saying that you are the mother, you are the father as well. So the great being, to me, feels entirely beyond gender. There's no... and when I've said that to certain people, they say, well, I don't agree with that. I think that it's the perfection of the union between the masculine and the feminine. I don't know the answer to that. But what I do know is that I really do love exploring the expression of these divinities, and then in the form of the name. So if it's Mahashivratri, for example, is coming up in March, which is the divine union of Shiva and Shakti, of Shiva and Parvati, his feminine aspect. One doesn't exist without the other. That being said, while I was with Ma, because of the way the culture is of the current times, and as an Indian woman, even if you are with, let's say, a saint or an elevated teacher in India who is male, there's a certain way in which one has to behave as a woman. Now, I say that knowing that when the devotees went to Maharaji in the 70s, it didn't matter whether you were, everybody was holding on to his feet, and, it didn't matter. But when I said that to Ma, she said, well, his Leela is like on another level. We can't even talk about that. And she laughed and said that. But I definitely had a lot of comfort being there as a woman in her presence, raising a kid, and there wasn't anything that I couldn't tell her. And my experience of her is not any different than people have experiences of gurus who are in the male body, which is of incredible wisdom, compassion, a sense of boundless love, indiscriminate. Everybody was welcome, is welcome. Having said that, though, it's hard to describe, but there are times that when I've been with her, I had this feeling, when people talk about source, S-O-U-R-C-E, I never really quite understood what that means, but I had this feeling that I was sitting at the feet of the source. And that's just how it's coming to my lips. I have no idea what that in fact means, but that was the feeling that I had, which is mother or father. You see how we can get all caught up in the words? But presence is, if we want to talk about it as presence, we can say that it's a quality of the beingness of all beings that we don't necessarily see when we are looking with these eyes. It's something that you know in the cells of your body. And if the witness in yourself can see that, that's what that presence is. And you don't have to tell yourself that. It just arises, So I wish we could call upon that at any given moment. Some people do, as they get on in their years and they do a lot of practice, they just immerse in it. And, I certainly saw that for Siddhi Ma, that, she was already fully surrendered to Maharaji when I met her back in 1998. But over the years, before she left the body in 2017, we saw her turning inward a lot, so that she just wasn't so talkative anymore, and she was very much in that space of just meditation, like a naturally meditative state, absorption. And you'd have to call her out, and say, "Ma, you want to have a bite of food?" or "Look who's here to see you," And the things that would attract her would be listening to chanting, listening to prayers, then she would kind of shake, just listen. And they say that about Maharaji too, that before he left the body, he kind of turned in. And so she actually prepared us, I think, for her leaving the body, because when we started to see her in the later years, we couldn't stay with her for too long. We couldn't ask any questions anymore. She wasn't sharing any stories with us anymore. She was very animated in the early years. She told us stories about Maharaji, and it was different. So that it seems to me that these beings are just forever in that state of absorption, and they have one foot out. Like just when you see the images of Tara, Tara has all her sacred anatomy with the sacred weapons that she needs to do her work, but one foot is down, ready to jump into action, in her seated position. So I feel like in many ways that's how Ma was. Like she was there until it was time for her to go. So to me it feels like she was always in that presence. When we were around her, we felt that presence. Sometimes the mind was so crazy that you wouldn't even allow yourself to feel that presence. But it remains. It remains like once you've had that experience, it can't be taken away from you. It's just there. And you can continue to tap into it. And we all have it. That's the thing, I might associate it with Ma, but we all have it. We all have a memory of an experience of presence.
Would you want to offer a song to close?
Yeah. So this is a chant. It's a short prayer. It is called Devi Prenam. So Devi means goddess. Pranam means to bow. But bowing in full surrender, in a way that we don't really know how to do, so we just have to go through the motions, so eventually we'll get it. And it's the closing prayer in 700 verses in praise of the goddess. So this was, remember I told you when I went to Kenchi, there was a Devi Navratri festival was going on. So these 700 verses are chanted during that time to the goddess in the form of Durga, Saraswati, Lakshmi, and also many regional goddesses. There are different ones for each of the 9 days. But I came across this prayer, and it feels to me like the essence of those 700 verses, where we're praising the goddess for her wisdom, for her love, for her compassion, for her fearlessness, and her ability to give us, to imbue us with those qualities. So because we have them, we can't find them all the time. So we're asking her to give us that form, which is her. And why? To take us again across the ocean of existence. Okay. So I'll just sing these verses, and then we'll sing with it'll end with a little Shri Ma, Jai Ma, Jai Jai Ma. Shivam Shanti Kare Brahmanim Brahmana Priyam Sarvaloka Pranatrim Cham Pranamami Sada Shivam Mangalam Shobhanam Shuddham Nishkalam Paramam Kalam Vishveshwarim Vishwamatam Chandikam Pranamamyaham Sarvadevamahim Devim Sarvaroga Bhayapaham Brahmesha Vishnu Namitam Pranamami Sada Shivam Vindhyastham Vindhyanilayam Divyasthana Nivashinim Yoginim Yoga Jananim Chandikam Pranamamyaham Ishanam Mataram Devim Ishwarim Ishvara Priyam Pranatosmi Sada Durgam Samsaranavatarini Shri Jai Ma, Jai Jai Ma. Shri Ma, Jai Ma, Jai Jai Ma. Jaya Jagatambe Ma Durga. Shri Ma, Jai Ma, Jai Jai Ma. Shri Ma, Jaya Ma, Jai Jai Ma. Shri Ma, Jai 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 Ma, Jai Jai Ma. Shri 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 Jagat Janani Sri Siddhi Mata Ji ki Jai.